Hello, welcome to feedback for 504 PRC 2012, the homework. As you know, the mark for this doesn't count. What counts is the examen sur table, which you do in January for the first session or June for the second session. Any questions about exam regulations, look on the AROD homepage under examen. This homework was the second session exam from last year. Obviously the big difference is that in exam conditions it's limited to 2 hours. Here you had unlimited time, and in exam conditions you have no reference resources. Here you could use the internet, dictionaries, the book, the course, whatever you like. So it might be interesting to sorry, not using the glasses yet, to have a go doing one or two of the past exams to see how you get on with that. No point sending them in because the feedback is online. The feedback for this I do as a video because I find it's more immediate and more useful for most students. There are always one or two who complain. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to do several different types. Okay, so going through this, I don't intend to give a corrigé as such of the perfect answers for each one. What I want to do is to give you an idea of what I was expecting and to comment on some of the problems which I encountered when going through your work. Overall, the mark here was 10.1 out of 20 for the entire homework, which is not too bad, but it wasn't quite as good as usual, perhaps. Do please use the model answer sheet for homework. There won't be one in the exam, it'll be copied to normal answer paper, but for homework when it's given, please use it. That counts for the second semester as well, for those of you who have other courses with me, including using alternate lines, because otherwise it's very difficult for me to mark. Because my handwriting isn't very good, I try to keep comments on your papers to a minimum. So if I underline, it's normally just a language problem, which won't lose you any marks as such. Sometimes I accompany that with a code such as NP for a noun phrase problem, or F means it's a French structure rather than typically English, or G for grammar, that kind of thing. One thing which comes up frequently is people spelling Latin or French with a small letter. In English, they always have a capital. Always. Okay? In French, if it's un français, it has a capital. If it's used as if français is used as an adjective or for anything else, the language, it's a small letter. But in English, it's always a capital. Always, always, always. English is easy. Always have a capital letter for English, French, Latin, etc. One comment I often put on work is relevance, often with a question mark, because it's really important to address the question. The question asks you for something specific and you have to answer that question. The question, the whole question, only the question, nothing but the question. Okay, so going through these, we'll start with question 1. I won't finish within a reasonable time. I'll need to do this in 2 videos because after about 15 minutes it tends to get too heavy to put online easily. So it'll be 2 videos, I would imagine, here. Question 1, out of 10, the average mark was 5.5, so a maximum of 2 points per each of the 5 questions. It'll be something relatively straightforward like this in the exam. It might be a multiple choice or a matching or something else, but it'll be something relatively straightforward, question de cours, so based on what you know, not so much reasoning or application. Because you were doing question 1 at home, you should be able to check some of the things which you were writing. For example, in question 1, looking at dates that things were borrowed. And there are things that you can use for that. You should all have a Petit Robert or equivalent, or access to etimonline.com for English questions. Okay, so going through these. 1A, Walter's lists of doublets in French which come from, have a Latin origin. So you might have in Latin, for example, claviculum, and you would have in French, there are 2 words, clavicule and cheville. They're both clavicule and cheville come from claviculum. The question is how, when, why, and so on. This is where you have to go and check. A lot of you talked about Charlemagne. Irrelevant here, because clavicule, for example, was first attested in French in 1541. Now, if you think Charlemagne lived in 1541, then it's your history, which is needs a bit of thinking about, I'm afraid. The point is that when France, what we now today call France, was invaded and conquered by the Roman armies, long time ago, they brought their language with them. the Romans brought their language with them and imposed it, or it was accepted by the people who had been conquered, who were under Roman occupation. And that became, or a version of it, became the language of the people in the whole of what we now call France. We're talking about 1,000 years here, so it's a long, long time. So the Latin that was brought, when the Romans brought the Latin to France, it wasn't adopted immediately. It was adopted little by little, imposed in some cases, accepted in others, didn't go to all regions at once. But even once it had become basically the language of the country, it still underwent a lot of changes over a lot of years. And language doesn't stay static, it evolves slowly. And that's when you have claviculam, cheville, causa, chose, bitumen, béton, these words that have evolved quite, which are related to the original Latin, but seem to be quite different, are the ones which have undergone that gradual change over a lot of time, many centuries. The words which are close to the Latin, the words which were borrowed separately later in a form close to the original. So that's why you have, for example, béton. The first attested form of béton was 1165. It almost certainly existed before that and evolved gradually to that form. Bitume, sorry, the mistake there should be bitume, not bitumen. Bitume was the first attested form is 1549. Similarly, cheville evolved gradually from claviculam to cheville, whereas clavicule was borrowed in 1541, the first attested form, possibly a few decades before that, but we don't know it. Okay, so that's why it's either a gradual evolution from the origin or a sudden import at a particular time, especially a sudden import after spelling was relatively fixed in French, so forms found it more difficult to change after that. Question 1b, the Old English Niman was replaced by Takan. So today only take has survived. Can you explain this? How surprising is it? Well, you can explain it because Old English, the original Old English and Old Norse were related languages, very similar. There was a lot of communication between them, but don't overdo the numbers. For example, the number of Norse invaders were probably a few hundred, possibly the low thousands, but not very many people. But there was a lot of intercommunication and intermarriage and interbreeding and into all kinds of things, sales and pillage and all the rest of it, no doubt. Because the language was similar, it was in some ways relatively easy for Old Norse to penetrate English, but the point here is that it's such a common everyday word, concept of take that we have today, or niman as it was in Old English. It's quite difficult for those everyday words, comparatively, to be replaced by borrowings. It's relatively unusual, relatively surprising. Won't say much more about that because that comes up in question 2 as well. Question 1c, English words pastry, master, cost and crust, all borrowed from French because they're similar in form. You can see the similarities in form, but the point is, what is the difference? Well, the difference is that there is an S in English, and all of them have a circumflex and no S in French. The difference in spelling came about in very specifically in 1740 when the Académie Française deleted thousands of S's in the middle of words in writing. Now, they didn't get rid of the pronunciation. What happened was the S had already disappeared in pronunciation, and the Académie Française, rather than insisting that everybody, or recommending everybody wrote bête, B-E-S-T-E, they said, okay, well, we say bête, we don't say beste, so we can get rid of the S and replace it with a circumflex in writing. So the writing is representative of the spoken form. Okay, but the circumflex, or in some cases an acute or a grave accent, allows us to keep a trace of the etymology of the word. Okay, why did that happen? Well, because you'll notice that in fact all of these are consonant clusters: pastry, muster, cost and crust, and not just any consonant cluster, but the consonant, it's the S before a t. That particular consonant cluster was particularly susceptible to losing the S in the spoken form. What you find, of course, is that in either more recent borrowings or words which don't have exactly this consonant cluster, or they do, but in a different stress, a word with a longer word with different stress pattern. So you might have croûte, but you have croustillant. You have hôpital, but hospitalier. You have maître, but you have un master. So some of these things exist in different forms. So you can see the connection between hôpital and hospitalisé. And croûte and croustillant and so on. The point is, of course, that English borrowed these words not from French after the reform of the Académie Française. Either they came from French before the Académie Française reform, and in fact, even when the S was still pronounced, so soon after the Norman conquest, quite possibly, or they might have come directly from Latin at a later date. Okay, you need to look at the dates. It's important to look at the dates. In fact, they all go back quite a long way. I think the most recent pastry was the mid-15th century, and crust was 14th century. But cost was about 1200, and master goes back to Old English, even coming directly from Latin. So well before the Académie Française change. Question 1D, how are we doing for times? Only a few minutes left, so I'll have to go quickly through 1D and 1E. 1D, some English words beginning with letter H pronounced H, others are not, similarly in French. Where a lot of you put the standard thing in French that words which have a Germanic origin are pronounced H, which they are in German. Words which come from Latin are pronounced without a H. They may be aspirated or not. Sorry. Talking about English, not French here. Words in French which come from German are aspirated. Ones which come from Latin have no consonant or aspiration at all. Okay, but that's a bit simplistic, even for the case of French, because some words which come from Latin have lost an H. They had an H that's been lost. Other ones have acquired an H. Some Germanic words never are not pronounced with an H. And all kinds of complications which are even clearer in a way in English. Just some examples. In English, hotel, you say hotel, but it comes from French. But if you look at texts from the 19th century, you'll often see written an hotel, not a hotel. Now, it's not correct to pronounce an hotel. If you hear somebody saying an hotel, think to yourself, this is a pretentious person I do not want to talk to. It's because it's somebody who doesn't know what they're doing at all. They're trying to be erudite or something. But the reason that you come across an hotel in some older texts is because it was pronounced an hotel with no h at all at the beginning. And a mystery lesson, that kind of thing. But today we do pronounce hotel with a h, which means there is no, you don't have a liaison n before it in an. And similarly, we do pronounce history with a h, end of story. Other words, words like horizon used to be pronounced horizon. Well, it's pronounced horizon in French. It used to be pronounced an horizon with no, but we have it today. So it's a bit more complicated than just that, because words evolve in different directions for different reasons. Okay, and obviously, of course, when you have words in English, they might come from German directly, they might have evolved from German, they might have come from Latin via French, or all kinds of things. So just be open to a little bit more complication than the very, very simplistic rule. Finally, 1E, and then we'll change and go on to the new video. That's why I'm trying to go very fast and getting confused in places. 1E, the connection between English words cane, bride, coin, and main, and the French words can, bride, coin, et main, respectively. A lot of you talked about false friends or faux amis. This is one possible definition of faux amis, but it's not really, most of the time when linguists talk about false friends or faux amis, they're talking about words which are etymologically related, but one or both languages have evolved the meaning, so the form still looks very similar from the common origin, and the meaning has evolved to be slightly different enough to lead to possible confusion or ambiguity. So it's a word like sympathetic and sympathique. They're very similar in form and very similar in meaning. They're both characteristics of a person. They're both adjectives. It's not as if one of them means sympathique and sympathetic means bookcase, for example. It's very close in meaning, but the difference is sufficient that it can cause problems potentially. What we have here are not words which are etymologically related. They're words which are completely unrelated. It's pure accident that they look the same. There is no connection between coin and coin at all whatsoever. The only similarity is the form, particularly the written form, because when you pronounce them, they might sound quite different. So really, rather than false friends, we talk about false cognates, words which might look as if they're related, but in fact aren't false cognates. Okay, we'll move on to question 2 in the second video. So stop this one here and move on to the next.